courant 2016, 17, 18, 19 et 20, nous avons dû faire les travailleurs ont été soumis à des procédures de redressement économique injustifiées, tout simplement au motif que le Tchad traversait une crise économique. Cela était dû pour les raisons officiellement avancées par rapport à la crise du pétrole, au déficit budgétaire de l'État, mais particulièrement par le fait que le Tchad ne pouvait plus assumer ses responsabilités vis-à-vis de Glencore pour le remboursement de la dette. Et donc, sous l'impulsion du Fonds monétaire international de la Banque mondiale, des recommandations ont été faites au gouvernement tchadien pour avoir ce redressement économique. Et vous savez que lorsqu'un gouvernement prend des mesures de redressement économique, c'est d'abord les travailleurs qui sont particulièrement concernés. Et donc, du coup, il y a déjà eu la réduction des salaires, il y a des salaires qui ont été gelés. Ils ont réduit les dépenses dans les secteurs publics, notamment dans le secteur de la santé et de l'éducation, qui sont vraiment des secteurs qui concernent beaucoup plus les personnes. Et on sait aussi déjà que dans les secteurs, par exemple, de l'eau, de l'électricité, peu d'investissements ont été faits pour pouvoir améliorer les conditions de vie des travailleurs et des citoyens, mais ces mesures ont été prises vraiment de manière injuste et on a dû les subir. Et jusqu'aujourd'hui, on continue à se battre pour que le gel des salaires qui ont été faits durant ces 4 années de grève soit rétabli. Mais dans quelle mesure? Et l'autre particularité aussi, c'est que nous sommes toujours intéressés à ce que le gouvernement fait particulièrement sur la mise en œuvre de ces engagements, sur la mise en œuvre de ces engagements auprès des organisations internationales. Parce que lorsque les syndicats ne surveillent pas de près les politiques publiques, on va tout simplement se retrouver devant des conséquences qui seront très difficiles et peu importe les grèves que nous ferons, cela n'empêchera pas la mise en place de ces mesures-là et qui vont qui auront des effets vraiment néfastes sur les travailleurs. Lors, par exemple, des réunions, parce que au niveau du Tchad, le FMI et la Banque mondiale ont pris l'initiative d'appeler les syndicats souvent de participer à leurs négociations. Mais la difficulté est que nous partons à ces négociations, nous les écoutons, nous faisons des recommandations, mais il n'y a aucun suivi. Nous avons toujours recommandé au FMI, à la Banque mondiale, de nous faire au moins le feedback de toutes les mesures qui sont prises au niveau du Tchad, parce que ce sont des recommandations qui implicitement s'imposent à notre État, mais dont nous n'avons pas vraiment, nous payons le prix le plus élevé, mais nous ne savons pas comment agir sur ces effets-là. Et donc, il faudrait pour nous, en tant que syndicat, de continuer à mettre la pression sur le gouvernement pour le rappeler que, non, en principe, les mesures d'austérité ne devraient pas s'appliquer de cette manière. On a pris l'exemple du projet ZLECAf. On sait que la plupart des pays africains ont signé cet accord-là. Mais s'il y avait eu des études de faisabilité, on aurait su que les populations n'ont pas adhéré à ce processus parce que la mise en œuvre de la ZLECAf, même si ça reste un accord continental, est-ce que nos populations sont prêtes à recevoir ce projet, particulièrement au Tchad? Nous avons dit, bon, c'est un projet porteur pour le développement économique. Il y a des secteurs qui sont prioritaires, qui vont peut-être bénéficier ou pas, comme le secteur de la viande, du pétrole, de la gomme arabique. Mais lorsqu'on va mettre en place, par exemple, les zones économiques spéciales, ces zones économiques spéciales vont couvrir des villages, vont couvrir des champs, vont déplacer des personnes et qui ne sont pas préparées dans une procédure de résilience pour réadapter leur activité. Dans les chaînes de valeur qui seront mises également en œuvre, il y aura des emplois qui seront créés. Mais est-ce que les travailleurs et les entreprises qui sont appelés à intervenir dans ces chaînes de valeur ont déjà préparé, par exemple, les négociations collectives, les emplois, les droits des travailleurs ou bien, par exemple, les normes internationales du travail? Est-ce qu'ils ont mis en place des mécanismes pour pouvoir protéger, par exemple, mettre en place la protection des normes internationales du travail. Ces éléments-là n'y sont pas. Et donc, à notre niveau, nous continuons de nous engager tout simplement pour d'abord dénoncer. Parce que la première arme que nous avons, c'est de dénoncer d'abord les manières injustes dans lesquelles ces politiques sont mises en œuvre. Également de nous mobiliser parce que il faut que nos travailleurs aussi soient informés de ces difficultés-là et qu'ensemble, ils puissent déjà avoir l'information de l'impact de ces mesures ou bien de ces politiques-là sur leurs conditions de vie et de travail, et également de continuer à faire des alliances avec les autres organisations. Par exemple, en 2021, le gouvernement du Tchad avait émis la volonté de d'avoir un droit sur les droits de tirage spéciaux. Et la première raison qu'ils ont donnée, c'était pour financer le vaccin de la COVID. Mais ensemble avec d'autres organisations de la société civile comme le CROSET et d'autres organisations, nous avons fait une déclaration pour dire que non, qu'en principe, les droits de tirage spéciaux sont des réserves et qui devraient normalement soutenir, par exemple, le financement de la couverture santé universelle ou bien la sécurité sociale au Tchad, mais qui ne devraient pas être utilisés d'une autre manière parce que notre gouvernement est tellement corrompu et on ne pourra pas avoir la traçabilité sur ces éléments-là. Donc, notre message reste tout simplement celui d'avoir plus de redevabilité de notre gouvernement envers nous, d'avoir la transparence sur la gestion ou les mécanismes qui amènent notre État à pouvoir mobiliser ces ressources et qui ont vraiment des impacts sur la vie de nos concitoyens. Merci.
Thank you, Demba. So you have highlighted the most important issue in which that you have given us, the channels in which debt has affected, the Chadian workers, through austerity, through pension, and so on. And also the kind of struggle that you have, with the national governments in forcing them to access information, and also for the sake of transparency as well. So that is something that we can build on in the next two speakers. So now I will move on to Prince from Ghana. So since you are representing the Ghanaian Agricultural Union, so already it's touched upon by Demba, but you could also reflect on its impact on the Ghanaian agricultural workers, and also what kind of engagement you had so far with other stakeholders, particularly with national, with our ministries, with state aid actors. What were the discussions like? As a result of this debt, I'm sure there are a lot of impacts happening in Ghana. So please walk us through the process, the political process you have with state actors, and also the kind of responses that you have been giving to that. So you have 7 minutes for that.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to share with our comrades and also our others on what has been happening in Ghana. I think that the first speaker pointed to frustrations increasing on the continent, and for us as workers and workers organization, our frustration is with debt is based on the fact that the way our governments have sought to deal with it, not only in Ghana, but across the continent, has had important implications for the labor markets. It has manifested in destruction in terms of the quality of jobs and also reduced the quantity of jobs on the continent. When we talk of the quantity of jobs, there are job cuts happening because of interventions by our governments to deal with the debt. There are also issues of hiring freezes, especially in the public sector, where we are not going to recruit new public sector workers, largely because of the program that our governments have gone into with international financial organizations in their quest to deal with the debt issue. And the thing about this hiring freeze is not only about the quantity of jobs on the continent, but it's also about public service delivery. Perhaps Africa is the region with the highest public service deficits in the world. So people-teacher ratio in most of our countries is unacceptable. Police population ratio is very high, having implications on security. And therefore, if we freeze employment into the public services, we are not only reducing the quality of jobs available, but also public service delivery. And one of the things is also about all this labor market implication has got to do with rising informality. So if you cut jobs, if you freeze employment, then you are pushing those who lose their jobs into the informal economy, because we know that our private sector is not growing enough to absorb a new entrance into the labor market. So if you cut jobs and you freeze employment, then basically we are going to grow the informal sector, and then reversing all the effort that we made in the past years trying to formalize the informal economy. And so that has another implication. The other thing that we are frustrated about is in terms of quality of jobs is looking at wages. So part of the responses had been an attempt to even reduce the real value of wages. So in some countries, there have been nominal wage increases, but the increase have been below inflation. So over time, the purchasing power of wages have diminished, and that has got implication for the welfare of workers. And as our General Secretary mentioned, in the case of Africa, it's not only the worker, but the worker or his or her immediate family, and also the other dependents in the extended family. So if we are reducing real wages, then it has implication beyond the worker and his immediate family. And then, of course, we are also quite frustrated. And the other implication of this whole debt thing has been through the use of very harsh austerity programs, where the cost of public services have been hiked. There have been removal of subsidies on some commodities, and that is going to already affect workers and their families. So that is also one of the things that have been of concern. Of course, we see that part of the thing is that, okay, let's raise revenue through taxation to be able to address our debt crisis. And the ways they have sought to raise the revenue, the taxes have been quite regressive, not progressive enough. So then, whilst on one hand we are increasing consumption taxes, some big giant corporations are getting tax holidays in the name of attracting them into some sectors. So big mining firms, oil firms are getting tax holidays for a number of years, while consumers are being slapped with high consumption taxes. And then we all know the kind of royalty rates that our government collect from our mineral resources. So we see some form of imbalance in trying to collect revenue in the country. Then another thing which had also come out is also the fact that we are concerned as workers, because now one of the ways, especially in the case of Ghana, had been that, okay, we are going to restructure our domestic debts, and quite a substantial amount of Ghana's domestic debts is in government bonds. And therefore, we were concerned about haircut in terms of our pension fund, because already pensions are low, and therefore, if we are going to lose some of the value of our pension funds through government interventions in domestic debt exchanges, it's going to affect us. So these are some of the ways by which the debt situation has affected. Now, let me just spend some few moments to share with you some of the strategies that in Ghana, in particular, we've sought to address these challenges. The first is also to counter the attempt to reduce the welfare of workers. So if you look at one of the policy tools in Ghana's extended credit facility with the IMF, it states clearly that they were going to work towards reducing the amount of money that is spent by the government in paying workers. And that means that real wages are going to decline. So this is what we did. In last year, we managed to get the government to increase public sector base pay by 15%. We call it cost of living allowance. This is because at the beginning of the year, inflation was quite low, but by the mid of the year, we're running into 54%, and therefore, purchasing power has been reduced. So we managed to work to get increase. And then we also sought to push forward the minimum wage increases. Of course, for most workers in Ghana who are in the unions, minimum wage is not really a concern, because average pay or even the lowest pay of union members is above the minimum wage. So when we struggle to push the minimum wage higher, we're doing it to support those in the informal economy, those in small private sector enterprises who do not have trade union coverage. Then we managed to get a minimum wage increase of around 26% for this year. So that is also one of the things that we have done. So we've tried to actually push forward, push back in terms of government's plan to reduce purchasing power of incomes. And the other thing that we have sought to do was to secure the value of our pensions. So in December, when the government of Ghana invited bondholders to come and exchange with new conditions, the unions came together and then we protested and said that we will not allow our pensions funds to be part of government's program. And so initially government did not agree, and then we threatened strike, and then they bashed. So they said, okay, now we are going to exempt pension funds from the domestic debt exchange. And because of the size of the pension funds and the fact that the IMS program had requested that domestic debt exchange was a condition precedent, government could not achieve that objective without a pension fund. So it came back again to do another offer. The unions rejected it, and then the government made a third offer, which the unions have agreed, because one, that offer guaranteed that there was not going to be haircuts in the principal, and then the coupon rate that government offered was much higher than the last two. So that was also one of the things that we have done. But I think the key lessons is that we need to work a bit more closely, because, for instance, in the case of Ghana, you realize that unions and their members manage to secure the value of their pensions, but individual bondholders who were not in the unions could not achieve much, to the extent that it got to a point where these individual bondholders, who are not really the most vulnerable in society, wanted to get trade union support to secure their investment. So I think that going forward, and like our General Secretary said, solidarity and greater organizing is the way to go. I think that when we are more together, our government tend to listen to us than when we divide our efforts. So I'll pause here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Prince. So now we can go directly to Caroline. So far, I mean, we have had the opportunity to reflect on the impact of debt on workers and employees. So now we have this picture. So let us shift our discussion a little bit, to the solution part. So I want you to focus more on what are the solutions from the workers' perspective. What is it that we are demanding? That is it what we are looking forward. What are the solutions that we are proposing for these challenges? So if you can zoom in on that, then we have 7 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I would like to take an opportunity to thank the other speakers that have spoken before me. They make my work very easy, because I think they have already highlighted some of the responses, some of the solutions that they are working on at country level in Chad, and in Ghana, and just continuing from their intervention, and also picking from AU's opening remarks. I think the most important thing that the trade unions have been doing over the time is to bring the human face in the discussion, and I like the comment from Patrick in terms of temporary human capital, and that's what trade unions do. And how are we doing this? We're building capacity of our members. Joel talked about 17 million members. We are trying to build the capacity in terms of capacity through understanding the whole concept of debt. And Prince from Ghana and Demba from Chad have been able to make that kind of progress they have because of the capacity they have been able either to acquire or to mobilize their membership in understanding these issues. And this capacity for us, we understand the kind of capacity we have, and we understand the gaps that are there. And for the gaps that are there, we've been able to reach out to some of our civil society organizations that we work with in terms of being able to build the capacity. We just finished a 2-day capacity training for some of our trade unions that are here, and I would like to inform Patrick we have almost a delegation of 30 trade unions that are here, and we had 2 days to just understand, in-depth, dig in, and we had our civil society colleagues there to come and share, and we also had someone from the AU at the meeting to also share the AU perspective. So this is what we are doing, and I think yesterday someone said we need to stop lamenting and do something in our own individual spaces. So in our own individual trade union spaces, capacity for us is key. We are not yet there, and I think Aphrodite is providing our members that are here an opportunity to listen and to learn and to understand what others are doing in their spaces and see how we can build forward. The other thing, and in terms of responses and solutions that the trade unions are doing, is how do we tell this story by giving it a human face. We can only tell this story by giving it a human face through the research that we are doing. And Prince and Demba have shared some of those researches that have been able to influence the national processes. We've done such researches in Kenya and in Zambia, Tunisia, looking at how the kind of restructuring, debt restructuring, the kind of debts and how they are affecting the day-to-day lives of workers. So we are telling the story with facts and figures, but giving it a human face. So that's what we are doing. And also being able to make sure that the decision makers cannot, deny the facts that are there. The other area that we are working on, and in terms of trying to provide solution, is being able, through the capacity building and through this research, they say you can be brought on the table. Patrick said you will look at ways in which trade unions can be on the table. You can be on the table and you be the meal and you not know it. So you need to come on the table and have facts to be able to argue your cause. We can say the IMF policies are bad, the World Bank policies are bad, our governments are taking debt, but what solution are we offering as trade unions to this, policies that are being put in place? So strengthening what we call social dialogue structures at national level. We have them at regional level, a sub-regional level. I work for the East African Trade Union Confederation, an organization that has an observer status with the EAC, and we constantly engage the regional economic blocks in terms of, pushing those policies at the regional level. We have the wages board. When we meet at the wages board and we are discussing wage increment, as Prince and Demba have talked about, can we bring the matter of debt in this discussion? When the labor boards are meeting and are talking about issues of value chain addition, issues of productivity, can we also bring on board the issues of debt? The issue of social security funds, I will not even repeat that because Prince and Deborah have spoken largely about it. So we are looking at how do we continue to strengthen our social dialogue spaces to include the issues of debt. And then the fourth place or the fourth intervention or solution is advocacy, lobby and campaigns. And this is where we are really looking forward to build and strengthen our strategic alliances and networks to be able to carry out campaigns that would be able to influence our policies. And this particular meeting, as being here, is a step towards being able to meet that. And I think I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. So yeah, there are a lot of like interesting points in your discussion. So the one that you said, we need to give it like the human face to our approach, to our researchers, to our engagement. That is also so important. And also you have highlighted the importance of like capacity building. That is also the most important point, I would say. So now let me hand over the floor to Caroline. Christina. So Christina, since you are representing CSO based in the global north, I want you to focus more on the importance of alliance building. I mean, with that, we can also discuss about providing support, technical support, and information support, training for those trade union civil societies in the global south. So what are the experiences so far there? So what kind of engagements like you can envision with between these two regions as well? And also, if you can share with us about the Sri Lankan experience. I mean, Prince has mentioned about domestic debt restructuring. So we all know what happened like in Sri Lanka. So trade unions are mobilized and protested for that. So if you can also share like your experience on that as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, it's a great honor to be here and to share experiences from engagement from the CSO community, which not always actually works together with trade unions, and which we really hope with this session to change. To look into the future, let me quickly look into the past. Yesterday, when the whole conference was opened, you heard a little about the first debt crisis and about the Jubilee 2000 movement. And my organization comes from the Jubilee 2000 movement and from the experiences with this first debt crisis. And this first debt crisis was characterized by a debt resolution architecture that favored creditor rights to be repaid or over, well, the kind of debtor country's right to flourish, if you like. And that was not because all the creditors back then were super ruthless or very bad, morally bad actors. I mean, some of them perhaps were, but I think that was not at the core. At the core is that sovereign debt is the only category of debt which is not regulated, not dealt with, especially in a context of crisis, by so-called insolvency laws. So you have a very fundamental conflict when it comes to debt. You have, on the one hand, the right, the norm that contracts should actually be honored, right? The interest, the right of the creditor to be repaid. And then you have, on the other hand, sometimes situations where honoring a contract would actually mean harming human rights, those that are impacted by this contract. And how to resolve this conflict? For this and other contexts, you have laws, you have regulations, and this is missing when it comes to sovereign debt. So you have a kind of Wild West, if you like, in this area. And back then, in the first debt crisis, that meant, for instance, African countries, on average, that they had to negotiate with the creditors at least 7 times until the debt crisis was resolved. Let's take Senegal. Senegal had to restructure 14 times until the debt crisis was resolved. And what we had in the meantime were 2 shallow debt treatments and lots of austerity, which crippled the economy and which led to very high poverty. Now, if we look at today's second debt crisis, of course, the situation is a bit different, right? It's not only official creditors like Germany now playing a role, it's China, it's much more bondholder debt. So the whole creditor profile changed. It's not necessarily the same countries. We just heard about Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was not part of this first debt crisis. So you have a different situation. But then there is a repetition of many factors from this first debt crisis, especially when it comes to the systems at work that are terrifyingly similar. This is starting with, in 2020, 2021, for instance, financing the debt service, especially to private creditors with public finance, or the IMF World Bank emergency finance that, flooded countries, let's say, the allocation of special drawing rights, all this kind of public finance that actually were meant to help countries to cope with COVID, austerity. Many countries, beginning already in 2021, started slashing public budgets. So all that ensured financing that service instead of already going for deep debt treatments. That's the first. Then we heard about some countries, Chad and Ghana, that were part of the so-called new G20 common framework. What we see there are similar principles at work as we had in the first debt crisis, which is, well, working on the assumption that bigger debt write-offs should be principally discouraged. That's actually written in the working principles of the common framework. That actually, if debt relief is agreed, is left at the discretion of each single creditor, and so on. And the lessons from the 80s and 90s, the lessons from the Jubilee 2000 movement are, well, in the end, this will end up being much more costly to both the debtor country and the creditor countries. Now, what's different from the past, that's actually everyone, including the IMF, the World Bank, or the creditors, everyone agrees that the common framework, that the current debt resolution architecture doesn't work, right? That we actually need something different, that we need changes. But in policy discussions, alternatives are not really being discussed, right? They discuss things like, I don't know, guidelines for whatever. And this is where CSO and trade unions come in. Back then, the Jubilee 2000 movement, what they did, actually at the end of a long cycle of dragging on crisis, a long cycle of crippling economies, what the Jubilee 2000 movement, which were CSOs, social movements over the world, right, in global south countries, in global north countries, what they did is taking this issue, which is very technical, it's very hard to access, right, which is being discussed somewhere, I don't know, in closed rooms in Washington or wherever. They took this issue kind of out of this niche, of this technical niche, and made it to an issue of development, social safety, and human rights, right? And when we talk about human rights development, workers' rights are a very important element of that discussion. What social movements back then were, they were absolutely paramount to enforce debt relief, to actually lead to what we heard yesterday about this broad debt relief initiative, the so-called HIPIC initiative. That was because social movements were pushed for it. And there was this combination. We already heard about campaigning, public awareness rising. That was part of let's say, the movement. The other part was bringing informed analysis and alternatives to the table. And this kind of muscle, this kind of movement that we had in the 90s, that's missing, but that's exactly what we need. And both CSOs as well as trade unions can kind of build this muscle that we need to push for this change. You asked for the Sri Lankan case. So Sri Lanka is not part of the common framework like Ghana is, or Zambia was, or Chad was. Sri Lanka is outside the common framework, but they use the kind of same structures. And we have the same problem, like we have in Ghana and in other countries. There is all those creditors, from China to bondholders to whoever, Japan to whoever, a very, very complex creditor profile. Many, many actors with many competing interests. We have geopolitical conflicts out there between China, between the West, between private creditors. And in Sri Lanka, the crisis was purely external. So Sri Lanka had to default on its external debt in April 2022. But private bondholders said, well, we only participate if there's also equal treatment with domestic creditors. So that was first not part of the condition of debt restructurings, but it became part because private creditors, bondholders said we don't participate without. So in Sri Lanka, the banks, they were very vulnerable, etc. So what the government did to ensure that actually external creditors participate in a debt restructuring, what they did is saying, okay, we will follow your condition. The only way we can do that is restructure pension funds. So the domestic debt restructuring in Sri Lanka will actually mean that workers will lose at least half of their earnings in pension funds, of their savings in pension funds. And because that is, just unfair, and it actually means limiting losses to external creditors instead of finding a just solution. And again, because we don't have this legal framework, that's the main reason why this kind of who's the strongest and the strongest wins is taking place. in Sri Lanka, the trade unions together with CSOs, they went onto the streets, they wrote a letter to the IMF, resisting the domestic debt restructuring. And when we talk about how to work with Global North CSOs, but also CSOs in general. So in Sri Lanka, it was both CSOs, trade unions, kind of doing these activities. And in the Global North, what we did is supporting this with press releases, with kind of making this known in the Global North, in a country like Germany, which is actually a creditor to Sri Lanka. So it's kind of them indirectly also demanding this kind of concessions. And we do have access to the IMF on other levels. So what we do is then also going to the IMF, kind of bringing this forward. We will have someone from Sri Lanka in Germany in October. And working together. This is what in the 90s led to deep debt relief. And this is what we hope also in 2023 and forward will lead to better resolution for countries.
Thank you, Christina. So please let us give a round of applause to our 6 speakers. So now let us open the floor for any comments, questions, suggestions. Yeah, so I can see already like a hand. Wow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. Okay. Okay, so I will start with 1. And yeah, you got it.
Sorry, I was just saying, if you see the hands that are not trade unionists, in our generosity, we will take non-trade unionists first. Then we'll take ourselves later. Thank you.
So, okay. That order. Please make your question or suggestion more specific and shorter.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Merci pour les présentateurs. Moi, c'est Abdelhamid Nassour du Tchad. C'est une occasion pour moi de remercier les présentateurs pour leurs commentaires, pour tout ce qu'ils ont déroulé comme information. Pour moi, c'est un commentaire. Je voulais mettre l'accent sur le travail, n'est-ce pas, que font les syndicats, parce que c'est un travail très important. Très souvent, le syndicat est considéré comme du volontariat et ne bénéficie pas d'assez de temps, d'assez d'appui, assez de moyens. Et donc, c'est très difficile pour eux, n'est-ce pas, d'apporter une plus-value à l'amélioration des conditions de travail. Tout à l'heure, ils ont fait cas, n'est-ce pas, du cas de la dette du Tchad. J'aimerais aussi faire un petit commentaire sur ce point. Le Tchad, à l'instar des autres pays subsahariens, a bénéficié, n'est-ce pas, de l'instrument financier qui est la dette, qu'elle soit bilatérale ou multilatérale. Eh bien, le débat sur la dette n'est plus d'actualité parce qu'il en a été largement discuté hier. Nous connaissons les avantages tout comme les inconvénients. Le plus important ici, c'est l'utilisation de la dette, comme l'a dit quelqu'un hier. Le Tchad a bénéficié, n'est-ce pas, dans le cadre commun de la facilité élargie de crédit de FMI en 2020, d'un montant assez important. Et très souvent, la dette pour nos pays africains, elle est plutôt, n'est-ce pas, utilisée dans le cadre budgétaire et c'est pas très bénéfique pour nos pays parce que le financement des infrastructures de développement, le développement du secteur porteur est la ligne qui doit, n'est-ce pas, conduire nos financements extérieurs. Alors que pour la plupart des cas, c'est plutôt le financement budgétaire ou un appui budgétaire qui intervient et qui n'apporte pas, n'est-ce pas, une plus-value à l'amélioration des conditions de vie de nos populations. Donc voilà un peu ce que je voulais dire rapidement ce matin afin qu'on puisse échanger ensemble. Merci.
Thank you.
Ok, merci. Moi, je m'appelle Béen Jarret. Je dirige un think tank aux aides du Tchad. Donc, je voudrais d'abord féliciter les syndicalistes
pour la présentation brillante qui nous ont permis de mieux comprendre encore les activités que font dans nos différents États. Moi, je voudrais aborder dans le même sens que mon frère du Tchad par rapport à la dette. Je voudrais tout d'abord faire un petit commentaire, sur la présentation de ma compatriote Demba. Effectivement, l'opacité de la dette au Tchad fait de sorte que il est difficile d'avoir l'accès aux informations, surtout de la dette Glencore. Nous, en tant que centre de recherche, et think tank, nous avons fait une recherche en collaboration avec la Fondation Suède et un numéro spécialement dédié sur la dette Glencore. Nous avons mis plus de 6 mois à mener une recherche pour pouvoir publier les informations nécessaires sur la dette Glencore. Malgré nos carnets d'adresses, malgré que nous avons collaboré avec le gouvernement, nous avons collaboré avec les différents chercheurs, mais nous n'avons pas pu obtenir le contrat en question, contrat de Glencore. Nous avons tout fait pour obtenir le contrat, les documents nécessaires pour nous permettre d'informer le public. Donc, ce que elle a dit, moi, je voudrais confirmer parce que nous avons vraiment mené des recherches et ces recherches ont abouti à un numéro spécial et nous avons convaincu le ministre de pétrole participer comme panéliste. Nous avons organisé une conférence sur la dette Glencore dans un grand centre en N'Djamena qui a réuni beaucoup d'hommes d'État, la société civile, les syndicalistes, etc., pour présenter les résultats. Et le ministre de pétrole était panéliste et conférencier. Malgré ça, l'insuffisance du document, c'est l'accès au document clé de la dette qui pose le problème. Et comme nous savons, la dette n'est pas si mauvaise en soi si elle est bien utilisée pour les investissements durables. La dette, elle est très bien si elle est très bien cadrée. Mais le cas de notre pays, il y a ce problème qui se pose, comment cadrer la dette, orienter la dette comme Vert vient de dire. La dette est utilisée beaucoup plus dans le cadre budgétaire.
Excuse me, sir, may I? So, for the sake of time, I think you need to wrap up your statement.
Too fast?
We need to go. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Donc, je voudrais conclure en encourageant les syndicalistes d'aborder, ils font déjà un bon travail, mais s'ils peuvent aller aussi dans le cadre de recherche, approfondir la recherche, ajouter à ce qu'ils font comme activité. Voilà ce que je voudrais dire. Comme le temps ne suffit pas, je vous remercie, je laisse la parole.
Thank you so much. So let us give.
Muito obrigado. Não sei se tem tradutor em português. Eu queria falar em português. Sinto-me seguro. Okay? No. Oh, that's the problem. There's no inclusivity. So, okay, I'll try English. Je peux parler en français aussi, mais I'll try in English. The question is, we all agree that there is problem. We have noticed where the problem is, but we are not. I don't know whether it's giving the responsibility to the right person or not. Let's say, we say the trade union, maybe they are the one who are in a good position because they are the one who works, they see the pain of working and producing goods and so. But we have experienced that we point some of the trade union into power. They change their behavior like the one we are condemning. So what's the problem? We say, no, let's put the woman. In my country, used to be said that, no, you cannot put men into the finance department because those people are very, they are thief, let me say so. Whenever they see money is just, it's better to put woman because she has got the sensitivity of managing the family. And so we put woman there. She's also smart. They're also doing the same. So, I mean, this is, it's really, I would like to understand. I would like to understand what are we, what should we do to face this problem? It's not because we don't know. We know, but we're not doing what we're supposed to do. Why?
Thank you. So, any questions?
Good day. I don't know if it's a question, but I'll just give. Oh, my name is Taba Mulifi from Botswana, affiliating with Botswana Council of Churches and also the founder of Botswana Stewards Organization for Youth. I am really, really interested to know what can be done to change how sovereign debt comes through, because I've realized we get the money from there. Then the very people we get the money from, that companies are the very companies that come and do the work that we borrowed the money for. So are we still being colonized in that way? Because even the corruption, it will still come again from those very companies. What are we reaping from the sovereign debt that we are always praising? Do we even need it? Because I feel they're doing it for their own benefit. We are not benefiting anything. For example, in Botswana, the projects are always being given money. It will be estimated that a project maybe for 1.8 million. If you go around 3 years later, the project is not done. It's even up to 300 million in debt again. And it's the very people that give us the money that bring the corruption. Right now, we have an issue that was gazetted last week about the plant for purifying water. The very company, you search about it on the Gazette, they're saying it's giving people holidays, yet it's not complete. So my question is, do we really need the sovereign debt that they're saying we need it? Or do we mentally say we need it? Do we need it as Africa? Do we need to be in debt? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 more questions.
Thank you. Yes,
I'm good.
thank you. I am here is Alan, and I'm the team leader at Youth for Tax Justice Network. My question actually is around, I think someone talked about the solidarity bit of it. And as trade unionists, you work with workers. My question is about the young people that are not yet workers, because it is part of the biggest challenge that we're having in terms of, on the continent, youth unemployment, and all solutions that have been given require in one way or the other some level of investment, some level of having actually resources to respond to some of these challenges. And that is on top of even other crises that young people are dealing with, the climate change crisis that also is being responded to through debt and all that. Now, my question is that you're already engaging people that are in meaningful employment or are engaged in employment, but then there is also a group of people, and you talked about strength in numbers. You said you're 17 million. I can assure you that for young people, we are almost in millions. The only challenge is that we're not yet employed, we're not yet workers, we're not yet in that sort of category. My question then is, how do we collaborate? How do we bring that solidarity in terms of when we are saying we need resources to invest in sectors that are critical to youth livelihoods? Those resources require debt. Those resources require governments that are not collecting more. They are not getting tax. They are not doing what they will need to borrow. And for people that are already working in sectors that probably benefit from data and not see the economic impact on livelihoods of young people, how then do we build this solidarity? Because I believe as young people, we can bring millions to this movement. Thank you.
Thank you. So, lady from there, then we can, yeah.
Thank you very much, Barbara from Aphrodite board. I have two questions. The first one, I think, relates to what my chief from Tax Justice Network is talking about. Where are the youth? How are you engaging the youth? And with unemployment, I think we need that critical mass so we can drive the change. Beyond that, I kind of think that we talk about the IMF and the World Bank in abstract. And half of the time we never bring them to these meetings. And I think this is a big gap that I've noticed. It's almost like the lady from Malawi was saying, that we're shaving their heads in their absence. I think it's important that we bring them to these conversations and hear with them, engage with them critically, and that now we understand that we're in the second debt crisis. Apart from the IMF and the World Bank, the other players, we as a private sector, we need to have them here as well so that they can also engage meaningfully with this group of people that we have here. So this is a challenge not to the panelists, but I think to the organizers, Aphrodite, Trust Africa, and AfriCatalyst. So I thought I could just make that comment. The second one is really the recognition that the second debt crisis obviously has had a different profile of creditors. It's a complex profiles and complex deals, complex strategies that they're pushing, complex interests. And I think this requires a different way of engaging a civil society. And I want to commend, I think, Christina and Caroline in terms of borrowing some of the strategies that we used in Jubilee 2000, because now the issues have become so multi-layered. Not that they were not interconnected then. And then this then requires that we mobilize at a different level. What made it, and I just want to re-emphasize, I think, the strategies that Christina was talking about. What made Jubilee 2000 successful was not just doing research and sitting on those technical tables. What I'm seeing with the civil society now is that we're so co-opted that, being in a technical committee of the World Bank is such a privilege. We never went there. We refused sometimes to be there. We used the people who were impacted by debt to speak about the impact. And that's what moved hearts and minds of those, big guys were making big decisions on HIPC and other stuff. So I think we have to recognize that research alone is not enough for us to move the needle. We have to have a multi-layered approach to deal with it, and a multi-layered in the sense that it has to be across the ecosystem. So it's not just, the usual suspects, the usual briefcase NGOs, that the loudest that make the noise in the countries. It's the youth in the streets. In Jubilee 2000, you would be driving, somewhere in a taxi. The taxi driver knows that, we don't have drugs because my country is paying so much in debt servicing. That connection was so simple and yet powerful. We're failing to do that. And I think we need to get back to those strategies and help to move the needle on the fight against this monster called, I don't even know what it's called this time around.
Yeah,
Thanks.
So thank you. So one more question, yeah? Yeah, because we are running out of time, so we have to wrap up. So one final question. So yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel. My name is Jennifer van den Heever, Member of Parliament from Namibia. I'm just having two questions, short ones. The first one is, I would love to have presentations. I wish it could be shared with us as the delegates, in order to emphasize on implementation and action. We as Africans are very good with policies on paper, and it is where it remains most of times. Prince spoke about the inequality. I would like to know, we are facing youth unemployment seriously versus the debt issue and a bloated civil service bill. Where do we strike the balance? And then to Patrick for AU, is there any platform to embrace the free trade area for the youth? it's so important for us. We are encouraging to have it, and we don't know whether there is any platform for us.
Thank you. So, okay, just 30 seconds, okay? So, because we have to leave the room like in 10 minutes.
It is for the representative of AU. Je vais gérer en français. Il a juste dit qu'il faut investir sur le capital humain. Le développement au niveau du continent doit être mis en œuvre par l'investissement. Et nous avons entendu ça hier par plusieurs intervenants. Je voudrais lui demander, au niveau de l'Union africaine, qu'est-ce que nous faisons aujourd'hui pour que, depuis 1 an, le protocole qui a été adopté sur la protection sociale et la sécurité sociale soit ratifié par les États africains. Parce que le développement, l'investissement sur le capital humain, c'est la protection sociale qui prend en ligne toutes les catégories et les axes que nous avons évoqués. Éducation, famille, tout. Et dans ce protocole, tout a été dit par les chefs d'État africains. Les amis, depuis 1 an, pendant 7 ans, on a travaillé sur ce document de protocole. Et l'année dernière, les chefs d'État africains ont adopté ce protocole. Mais depuis 18 mois, aucun d'entre eux n'a ratifié ce protocole, si on considère la protection sociale comme un droit. Et c'est l'élément capital pour développer le capital humain. Et donc, je voudrais vraiment partager avec vous ça. Le mouvement syndical, il y a des options parmi lesquelles la dette est. Sans protection sociale, il n'y aura pas de développement en Afrique.
Yes. Let me stop here, I think, for the sake of time. Yes. So now I will give the floor to our panelists. So since we are out of time, I think we need to be so strict. So I will start with you, Joel. So please let us use 3 minutes strict. So I will be, yeah.
Let me give my first 1 minute to our youth presidents. Since we have been asked about youth, our youth are here. So I will allow her to just speak briefly and then I'll continue from the roots.
Thank you so much. I was raising my hand. You did say thank you. Thank you so much, comrades, and I appreciate the panel. Okay, thank you so much, comrades. My name is Ruth Kakame. I'm the ITC Africa Youth Leader and also a youth leader at the Central Organization of Trade Unions in Kenya. I was following yesterday's discussion, and I appreciate Comrade Patrick from the AU. I was keen to listen to your interventions yesterday in both panels, and allow me to provoke you a little bit also. Yes, to stone you in a minute. We, from where I come from the youth perspective, we hear that there are some debts that our grandchildren will live to pay. And looking at the push and pull factors around migration in the continent, both internally and those who leave the continent to go or work in the outside continents, issues around the growth in the informal sectors, the issues of unemployment for the youth that we've had quite a number of discussions around, and the gig economy, the platform economy. We've had from even the social media spaces about youth engagement, especially at the level of African Union. Then with the current debt conversation, even inclusion of young workers' participation in the AFCFTA. Do you see an opportunity where we can start, to collaborate collectively so that we push the agendas of the youth in the continent? Thank you.
Okay, so let me just continue to say that, yes, young workers, they are young workers. There are many, and they are in the movement, they are in the unions. We have a committee that, deals with young workers issues. So your point about collaboration, yeah, we've always said that is why we are here. We want to collaborate. At the moment, the meeting we had 2 days ago, we told ourselves, as a matter of caution, please, when you go back home, link up with other civil society organizations you can identify. Let us work together. We need ourselves to push. So we do that. At the level of dealing with the continent's debt crisis, At the moment, we have a consortium of 6 organizations that involve Afrodat, TGNA, Femnet, now we Trust Africa and ITUC Africa and PALU, Pan-African Lawyers Union. We are all together in this to see what do we do to address Africans' debt effectively. On the issue of youth unemployment, I have come to realize that Africans have to deal with this issue ourselves. Why do I say so? We wrote a proposal to a European organization to help us. We didn't find the interest. They're like, it is too difficult to capture that you might not succeed. And so we will not be able to report that we are just making efforts. And that realization dawned on me that this is our business. Again, it is why we are in this campaign together. We are saying you can only fight the inadequacy or insufficiency of development financing if you expand the tax base. In other words, create jobs. And our advocacy is that we agree there is a need for debt. You can borrow, there's no problem, but use it to create, durable, make it as durable investment, job creation, that targets job creation. And our social protection campaign, the number one ingredient of the social protection campaign is jobs, because it is income that is the first line of social protection. And when we say we represent 17 million people, and that by extension it is times 6, it's because those that are working are supporting dependents. And so if you create jobs, you are likely to deal with the corruption situation. My brother, quickly, trade unions are not necessarily saints. And so the idea is not that if you put trade unions there, it will change. But with our culture of deployment, organizational deployment, there is a sense of internal accountability. If we send you there to represent us, you have a sense of accountability. We want to see that you are doing well and you are representing us well. When you don't do so, we disown you. Besides, the issue of governance is everyday work. Now, Bridget, Barbara, you talked about engaging even if you are right, this is for Afrodat, but as trade unions, we engage the World Bank at the IMF. In February, we'll be having a technical session with them, and we are already prepping for that session, and we are putting our best foot forward to engaging with them. We are also saying to other partners, use us also. The G20 space, for instance, there is what we call the L20, that's the labor 20. For all the government that are in the G20, you have the labor counterpart of it. Where we are there, though we are saying we are not going to India because the Indian government is imposing we should be a trade union, and we are trying to boycott that. In other words, we must be democratic, and we put our issues there. They can also speak through us. Finally, and I'll give to my colleagues, is to say that we have already decided. No lamentation. How do we change it? 2024, for instance, for us, Africa Day, May 25. From January 1, we are doing an everyday work towards May 25, mobilization of how we can deal with the debt issue, so that on May 25, we will have a continental campaign issue around debt. We are here to see the theme of the African Union on May 25, but we are already decided that our theme will be skewed to capture the issue of development financing on the issue of debt, so that people can speak to it.
Thank you, Comrade Joel. Demba?
Oui. Déjà, merci pour les commentaires et les questions. Juste peut-être quelques éléments par rapport à la question de l'emploi des jeunes et sur les questions des femmes. Je pense que tous les positionnements que nous voulons faire, que nous faisons dans les syndicats, c'est beaucoup plus pour mettre en avant la prise en compte des besoins des femmes et des jeunes. Lorsque nous faisons la lecture de nos budgets, des budgets de nos pays, quand on essaie de voir sur chaque ligne budgétaire associée à chaque département ministériel, quel est le quota ou le pourcentage qui est réservé aux initiatives des femmes et des jeunes? Et c'est vraiment difficile pour nous de pouvoir soutenir, parler de l'emploi quand l'État lui-même ne budgétise pas dans son programme national tel investissement ou un tel pourcentage de fonds nationaux qui seront alloués aux initiatives des gens, à l'appui, à l'emploi ou à la formation professionnelle ou à l'autonomisation des femmes. Ces questions sont difficiles. C'est pourquoi nous suivons de près ces politiques-là pour pouvoir se positionner déjà et de dire effectivement que si on doit parler des femmes et des jeunes, allouons-leur plus de ressources, allouons-leur plus de possibilités pour pouvoir accéder à l'emploi ou au travail. Sur la question de la ZLECAF, l'une des raisons pour lesquelles la ZLECAF est mise en avant, c'est pour promouvoir l'emploi des jeunes, l'emploi des femmes. On voit sur les chaînes de valeur, nos économies sont tellement informelles et ces jeunes-là sont pleins de ressources. Il y en a qui sont déjà affectés par le chômage tout simplement parce que le gouvernement alloue déjà moins de ressources. Maintenant, si on met en place la ZLECAF, qui doit profiter prioritairement de la ZLECAF? Ce sont ces jeunes et ces femmes-là. Et nous devrions continuer à poser le problème et nous positionner afin que toutes les initiatives de nos gouvernements puissent protéger ou bien mettre en avant la question des femmes et des jeunes. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Doma. Okay.
Thank you very much. I think for the issue of youth, it's building strategic alliances, and I'm happy to link up with my comrade behind there, who talked about how do we engage the youth. Nigeria, for example, runs what they call the Hamatan and the Rain School, and these are annual schools that actually focusing on bringing together the youths, and in terms of just trying for them to understand the issues around trade union and other issues. But my other point will be on what Joel has said and what the chair raised in the morning. I attended the ITUC Global High Level Meeting Forum with IMF and World Bank this year. We are talking to them, and it's an annual event, and I was privileged to attend this year. And the issue of debt and our discussion was around who pays for it, because workers are normally the casualty. So this issue was discussed in details, and we had an opportunity to present our positions, our asks to both the director of IMF and World Bank, David and Chris and Georgieva. We had a one-on-one engagement with them, and some of the issues that we discussed at that meeting, apart from debt crisis, were issues around the financing of World Bank and IMF around gender equal access to decent work. What kind of projects are they doing there? And specifically also for Africa, we discussed a lot around the care economy, where youth and women are actually a high group there. We also discussed issues around universal social protection and decent work. We also discussed around just transition, and we were asking, this just transition that you are funding, who is it for? And how would workers benefit from this? And then we also had a lot of discussions around the economic policy and issues around labor safeguards. So we are trying in our own small way, as I said, but if they are listening to us, it's another question. And the issue of research, just for research, we actually don't do research for just research. Our capacity building, our advocacy work, what we take to the social dialogue forum is based on the research that we do. So our research informs the capacity that we want, the lobby and advocacy that we want to build. And also where we don't have the research capacity, then we look at who are the strategic research alliances that we can tap in. We work very well with CITINI on issues of trade. We work with Third World Network on issues of trade. So we don't have all that capacity. Where we don't have capacity, we try to reach out and try to fill in the gap. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I will focus on the question from the Honorable Member of Parliament from Namibia about youth unemployment and also the size of public sector wage bill. And of course, we also go back to the main question of use of loans and some of the proposals that we are thinking. We began the discussion, especially in the case of Ghana, following government's offer of debt, domestic debt exchange, especially in terms of the use of pension fund. And then when we met in the last 3 days amongst us, so we began to put up ideas about how do we reduce government's debt portfolio through use of pension funds in economic infrastructure, so that we use pension funds, but we've not concluded on the modalities and how to go about it. But if we're able to have better use of pension funds, invest it in economic infrastructure that can generate returns, in that way we free government, we give government some fiscal space to be able to do other things. And then of course, in doing so, we also reduce the burden of debt servicing, so that the government can have some resources to also employ more people, including the young people. Because really, if you look at some of the factors that affect growth of the private sector, you cannot take out the fact that public service delivery deficit has direct implication on the way the private sector functions. You can't have a very efficient, expanding private sector without a good public sector providing the services that will enable them to thrive. So we really will need to be able to create more jobs in the public sector to enable young people get access to jobs. So we believe that if we're able to invest pension funds in ways that will reduce the size of public debt, and therefore resources or government revenue that are used in servicing said debt, we create a fiscal space to enable more jobs to be created in the public sector. And the thing is also that we've made a lot of advocacy for economic transformation, especially the way in which our economic policies. And here we've spoken at length about our monetary policy. We have actually called for a shift from the general inflation targeting to focus our monetary policy on employment targeting. And of course, we deploy other fiscal policies of the government to make sure that we're able to achieve our employment objectives. So that is basically what I wanted to respond to Honorable's question.
Thank you, Prince. Yeah, Christina.
Thanks very much for the thanks very much for the great comments and questions. I want to touch on 3 issues. The first, also on youth. I think what you said is absolutely right. In the 90s, the Jubilee movement, really, everyone knew about the Jubilee movement. They brought the people to the streets. And I mean, my organization is still part of, comes from those times. And we always measure our campaign successes looking at those times and are always disappointed, right? Because we just don't mobilize those people to the streets. What we observed is, and I'm actually wondering to hear about your experience in your countries, but there seems to be a kind of division of labor between those older Jubilee campaigns doing more technical and advocacy work and these things. And what really mobilizes young people right now is the climate issue. So there is a campaign that's called Debt for Climate, coming from the Latin America extractivist discourse, which is very strong in Latin America, but also strong in northern countries, also strong in some African countries. South Africa, for instance, there's one of those groups. And so this is more about generational justice issues. It's more about existence in the sense of, well, that the climate emergency will actually mean, right? It's really about all our existence. And there is not really much research or advocacy or anything behind. But it's bringing young people to the streets. And there is this bit of, as I said, kind of division of labor, that there are some groups going to the IMF and really advocating for justice, and those really making the issue again known. So I'm just wondering whether this is also something of potential in your context, to kind of have those 2 issues linked. So I'm also wondering what you also said, Chair of Afrodat. You're absolutely right that the issue again is so complex. And I think after the HIPC initiative, after the debt cancellation was won, the whole issue, I mean, the crisis was resolved, right? And the issue got back from a social and development justice issue, again, to a very technical macroeconomic issue. And what is missing? So now when we talk, it doesn't matter to whom, if it's the IMF or creditor governments or whoever, or even people on the streets, it's all about, I don't know, financial issues, about contracts needs to be repaid. It's like, it's not again a development issue. And we are already in a development crisis. The debt service levels are already at a level, the highest in a decade, actually at a level when the HIPC initiative was established. We already see the SDG, and on the 18th September, there is the SDG halftime summit, actually looking at, okay, what have we achieved? Are the SDGs still achievable? They already know they are not. They are already unachievable. And a lot of the story behind is the fiscal space that's missing, but it's not yet back. Like the narrative is not yet, we are already in a development crisis, and this kind of link to development, to that is missing. That's, I think, something that civil society needs, again, like changing this narrative that we are in a development crisis. Final point, someone said, okay, the actors are different. So the whole discussion is a different one because the actors are different. In a way, that's right? Because China is much stronger, the private sector is much stronger. But so when we remember the Jubilee movement, it was very easy. You could just tell the G7, Germany, the US, etc., to cancel the debt. That's not possible anymore because their claims are so small, right? They really don't play any role. But they do play a role in a more indirect sense. Most of the contracts of bondholders, which are 60% of all claims of developing countries, so the biggest creditor group, they are governed by US, UK law, so by G7 law. IMF, World Bank, multilateral institutions are the second biggest creditor group. It's not China, the one biggest actor. It's a very important one, but it's not the biggest, right? So the second biggest, it's multilateral institutions. So the voting shares are with the G7 countries. And there are different things that China wants that creditor countries like Germany and others could actually try to make a compromise with. So that there are routes. They are much more difficult to explain to people, but there is still a high responsibility when it comes to find rules. And that's actually a challenge. On the one hand, there is still this picture. So they do have a responsibility, but it's difficult to communicate. So I think it's a bit of a question how to communicate, let's say, but still there is a responsibility. It's like, it's not hopeless just because China now is in the game.
Thank you, Christina. So Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very, no, is this microphone working? Because I fear it's not. Thank you. Maybe my voice is not loud enough. So first of all, I would like to thank all of you because it has been such an incredible panel, and also the interventions that we had, on the floor to highlight some key points. The first thing I want to let us be mindful of is that if we look at the statistics, you will see that, and I would like to, for the first time, to read something that I have in a presentation that we were delivering last time. So Africa is by far the youngest continent of the world, just to respond to my younger sister there. The statistics shows that compared to other continents, our median age, is 19 years in Africa, compared to 32 in Latin America and 40 plus in Europe. So you are the asset of the continent, as I said earlier. And also, when you look at the size of the population, as I said before, this continent will be 2.7 billion people in just 2 decades from now. In 2050, we will be 2.7 billion people, which is the combined population of China and India. I don't know, how should we explain to you that there is nobody in this world that can challenge you. Let me give an example, and I want to be provocative, because when you look at the root causes of colonialism and slavery, long time ago, just an example, you will see that we were enslaved because we had not a big population, but those who came to dominate us were certainly much more populated at that time. So population matters in terms of economic development. They might explain to us that we need to reduce our population because of the global blah, 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 blah. But let me tell you that China is what China is today because of its population. India is becoming also the power that we see today because of its population. The only thing we have to do is to make sure that we are able to harness effectively the potential of the population to create the wealth that we deserve and that we want. It is in our hands to implement and to achieve that. Under Agenda 2063, if you ever read it, and even if you ever read all the development plans of the continent, you will see that the population, and mainly the women and the youth, are at the center of the economic transformative process of the continent. So having said that, how should we explain more that do not wait for people to empower you? You can actually empower yourself. Because who can imagine? I was recently in India, and it was such a nice trip. And do you know what amazed me when I was there? Is that I was passing on a street in India, and I could hear somebody in his radio in India, which was an Indian guy, quoting the song of Wizkid, which is an African singer, a Nigerian singer. So just to tell you that no matter how you can frustrate yourself, you will be the power of the future of this globe. No matter how you see it. We are saying it continuously in every single space that we have to voice it out. You, the youth, are the power of tomorrow. And this can be achieved if we invest in you strategically. And we are doing so. But to make sure that it becomes effective, you have to understand the world in which you stand today. And you are the driving force to push our leaders to continuously improving the processes and the environment to make sure that it becomes more friendly to you and for the wealth that we deserve. I am personally convinced, and I'm deeply convinced, that we do not need any interventions from any part of the world. I can tell you that recently we organized a meeting where I was begging for little money, and Alexander is here. I was waiting for some money, and unfortunately the money was not availed because of reasons that were not explained to me. But when we concentrated on ourselves, we were able to raise the funds and to do what we wanted to do, and to do it our African way. And it was so successful that at least we were able not to be subject to somebody who will dictate something or who will allow us to do whatever he wants to do. Because money is power, and we should not forget it. But power now also lies on our hands, so we can do it. The question was asked, just to finish with the youth, the question was also asked about the implementation of policies to make sure that African countries are able to create the right space. I said it yesterday. The African Union is not an implementing body, and that you have to be mindful of that. Our mandate is to craft the policies that are implemented in their sovereignty by our member states. They are the one implementing, and you are empowered enough to push them towards implementation because they have to implement what they have, decided to implement. They have tasked themselves to implement the African Continental Free Trade Area. I understand your frustration because the process certainly has not yet reached, the maturity or, the level of, productivity that we're expecting. But let me tell you that, and I said it yesterday, no matter how imperfect it can be today, no matter how imperfect, we are going to build on those imperfections to make sure that by the centuries that by the decades ahead of us, we are able to achieve something that is sustainable and something that will speak to the issues that we are faced with today, like the debt issue, just to allude to it. We have opened a new line of conversation, saying that, okay, trade unions, that workers shall be at the center of the discussion that are surrounding that. But one thing that you didn't say here today is that your productivity also is a problem for this continent. The productivity of workers is of concern because if you compare the productivity of an African worker to the productivity of an Asian worker or a European worker, you will see that we are lagging behind. So please, forget about incentives. Forget about incentives. You have to make sure that you are able to deliver. But let's take it even at a personal level, because we can say it at an organizational level and point the finger of somebody who is not giving incentives. Yes, the salaries are not enough. Yes. Okay. But be mindful of the fact that even when you are in a private space, you have to watch out your productivity levels. So if it is below the expectations, if it is below the potential, why do you fail to understand why we are going to take debt? Because we are getting indebted because our productivity level is low. I said it here today, we have to embrace productive transformation. We have to make sure that we are able to produce food that we eat. I said yesterday that we are losing $110 billion per year for food consumption. And at the same time, you have 65% of the global arable lands. You are losing money in illicit financial flows. You are stealing your own money, placing it to, safe havens somewhere, and going to beg for 1% of that money as debt. And unfortunately, they are giving it to you at terms and conditions that you cannot afford. So who is to be blamed? And people that are behind those issues are workers. So we need a strategic mindset shift within this continent to make sure that people understand that when you steal your own money, you are derailing your development process and you are subjecting yourself to heavy indebtedness and to problems that we cannot achieve. So let me finish here and really thank you for the wonderful opportunity and let you know that the African Union Commission is at your service to make sure that we push forward the development agenda of the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Wow, what a discussion we had. It was so informative, provocative, I would say inspirational. Yeah? So I would like to thank all of our distinguished panelists. So give them a round of applause. And also to you, most importantly, for making our session vibrant, very engaging. So a round of applause to yourself. And also to the sole organizer of this conference, AfroDad. So give them a round of applause. Yeah. And also I'd like to thank our translators. Thank you. Yeah. So we have one announcement. So there is also another session taking place on the main room. So it's about the African economic outlook. So should you want to participate, that is happening now. So it's the main session. Before we conclude, I think Joel would like to say something. So,
no, just to on behalf of our leadership, to thank the African Union through Patrick for this engagement, and to say that we want to institutionalize this engagement with the African Union. This is part of the reasons why we are here. And for the fact that we have you, we will start that process, that discussion with you going forward. Thank you very much, comrades.